My Govan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer. And welcome back to Divide and Conquer as we bring you another developer diary on the road path, the road map, to whatever the next version is going to be called. Probably version 4. We haven't really thought about it much, if I am honest. So, developer diary, whatever this is, 23, I think? I could be wrong. So, last time I spoke about there being a rather large trait overhaul, and ancillary overhaul, which Rohur, our latest team member, has been handling entirely on his own at the moment. And he's very kindly given me a little bit more information to give to all of you about how some of the new traits, some of the new things that are going on, and how traits are a little bit more impactful now. And so that is what the first thing we're going to talk about. So the biggest thing is that the biggest thing that you might notice, I suppose, there's a lot of minor changes, but the ones that may stand out is there's quite a few more buffs and debuffs based on certain culture affinities or locations, for example. So, some of these, this is only a small snapshot of them, but this is just some that we can talk about. Angmar and Gundabad, for example, both prefer the cold northern provinces. And so they get a trait that gives them a bonus in these northern provinces, and every other faction in the game except the dwarves get debuffs in these cold, frigid northern lands, because no one else likes the frozen north, but Angmar and Gundabad, in our DaC lore, thrive in it. So they get a trait that gives them a small bonus in the north, everyone else gets a debuff. The dwarves get neither, so the dwarves get neither a bonus nor a debuff in the cold northern land. The Elves and Dol Guldur, for example, get bonuses in Mirkwood itself, whereas everyone else except the Anduin get debuffs. So fighting in Mirkwood will be easier for all Elves and the forces of Dol Guldur, but everyone else will dislike fighting in Mirkwood for the grim closeness of the region. And of course the Elves have adapted to it, and it is their spiritual home, and Dol Guldur have turned it to their need. So the others don't like fighting there. Harad and Khan, similar vein, they now far enjoy fighting in the desert and heat of the south, and everyone else gets a debuff. Now this is already sort of in the game already, because you can set a stat file in every unit entry that says how much they like heat, and Harad and Khan already aren't affected by the heat, whereas everyone else is. So it's basically unnoticeable, which is why the trait is wonderful, because it actually makes it more of a thing. But previously, anyone who was not Harad or Khan did actually suffer fighting in the desert, but as I say, it was really not that noticeable. But it does mean, I suppose, if you were fighting Harad in Gondor, it would be easier than fighting Harad in Harad, even just a little bit. Another one is a trait he's dubbed the Dwarven Grudge, and this one I think is really cool. Essentially, if you're playing as any of the Dwarven factions, and Dane's Halls, Moria and Gundabad, Moria's further south, and Gundabad, if those three provinces are not controlled by at least a Dwarven nation, it doesn't have to be yours, it just has to be a Dwarven nation. If they are not controlled by Dwarven nations, then all Dwarven faction leaders get a negative trait, Dwarven Grudge. Essentially, that they have not yet completed their task of retaking their spiritual homelands. Of course, Moria and Gundabad more closely than Dane's Halls, but and they get this negative trait. Once a dwarf has all three factions, the trait goes and it's lifted. I think that's very, very cool. I should just state, I've not gone into the files and looked at what these debuffs are, but I do have it on good authority that these are not crippling debuffs. They are more minor annoyances than they are absolutely going to ruin you. It doesn't now mean that attacking Khan Durm for Bree, for example, is going to be nigh on impossible because of the trait makes your general useless. They are just minor debuffs, because the game doesn't have very many debuffs, specifically military or leadership based, and so it just adds a little bit more to that. Now, another one of the cool traits, which I think is very good, and it only applies for 10 turns. So this lifts at the 10th turn. But for the first 10 turns of the Rohan game, Theoden is locked to Edoras and has a very negative debuff. Now, this one is big, and this is Saruman's Influence. Now, as I say, it does only last 10 turns, so it's only a little bit of flavour, but it is now there. So Theoden starts the game, although we're obviously in 2980, and overlook that, please. But although we're in, don't look at that, you can't see, I'm putting my hand over it on my screen, but I appreciate you can't see that. But Theoden will be locked in Edoras because of Saruman's evil plans and his influence, but it does pass 10 turns. Some minor flavour traits. An example of these are our version of Rune, of course, has the dragon cult as being a rather central theme to the faction, and so there's now a few traits that actually relate to the dragon cult specifically, which I think is very, very good. And additionally, some ancillaries now, if they are held for a particularly long time, will benefit certain traits. Now, again, I've not got an example link of this, but it just means that holding an ancillary, and of course the ancillaries are transferable, but if you are to hold certain ones for a reasonable length of time, it will then boost traits that are linked with those ancillaries. Which is very, very good. There will be more detail about all of these traits and everything, of course, as we get closer to the time, and I'm sure there'll be a document that may be able to be read if you're really into your traits and ancillaries, but for the moment this is just to give you an idea of what sorts of things are being done, and this is far from completed as well, so that's why there may not be as examples as you might have hoped. Previously there were traits that, there were ancillaries that were banners, and you may know of these. So if I was Anduin and I fought against the Moria, say 3 or 4 times, I'd get an ancillary that was like Goblin Banner, and it would give me buffs when fighting against the goblins. Well, Rahur has taken that idea and implemented it far greater and turned it into a trait rather than ancillary. And so now, if you fight and win against a number of factions with the same general, then he specifically gets rewarded. Whereas the banners was, the banner, anyone could have won the banner. I think you only had to fight against them once. It didn't make any odds. But now you have to take a general and fight against the same faction a number of times, and he will get a trait related to that, and he will get rewarded. So it makes it more of a sort of mini mission, if you will. And another one that I think is very good flavor-wise, again, so if you fight and win against all 3 dwarven factions with a general from Gundabad or Moria, you get a substantial trait and get rewarded very, very well. So, of course, Moria and Gundabad, you'll get traits if you fight against the dwarves from that same trait I mentioned a moment ago, where fighting against a single enemy a number of times with a single general will reward that specific general well. Gundabad and Moria expand on that, and if you fight against all 3 dwarves a number of times with the same general, he will get substantially rewarded, and he'll get a trait. So that's very cool. And as I say, it just makes it more of a like sort of mission, doesn't it? The wounded and injury traits have been expanded, so no longer is it just scarred. Everyone is scarred. Now they're actually expanded. There's more detail to them, and there are more traits, which is good. There's specific path choice traits now as well for the 3 nations that make big choices. So Bree, you'll get specific traits depending on whether you go Mercenary or Dúnedain, Dorwinian, Elven or Northman, and of course Canned, Mordor or the Blue Wizards. So your generals will then develop traits depending on the choice you've made, which is also very good. And then the last one I've got listed here, the next developer diary, I'm sure we'll go into even more detail with these as this increases in progress. But the next point that I have on the list is that there are also now new sub-race flavour traits. So these traits don't really affect the gameplay too much. They do have minor effects, but nothing severe, and these are sub-race traits. So this was seen a little bit before with the Elves, and it's just expanding on that. So previously, of course, we have the Elves, but they are all generally akin to a different peoples. Whilst all Elves are either Noldor, Vanyar or Teleri, of course, they are then broken down into their subcategories. So you will have, for example, the Lindar in Linden, the Lindar, the Sindar, the Nandor in both the Woodland Realm and partially in Lorien. You'll have the Noldor, obviously, of Imladris, and the Avari of Dorwinion. And it just breaks nations down into those kind of categories. The same thing may be true in Dol Amroth, where you might have Númenorian descendant, or you might have Middlemen descendant, because of course Númenorians, Gondor and Dol Amroth are a mix of Númenorian bloodline and the peoples that just lived here when they landed. And of course Dol Amroth also has elven lineage. And so they may just be broken down, there's sub-races broken down throughout nations that can have them. So that adds a little bit more flavour to it. So the traits and ancillaries, of course, being overdone entirely, and that process is coming along quite nicely, and that's just a snippet of what you can expect in the next version with the traits. And then we move on to some more little general minor points with the campaign map. the Woodland Realm, when you sign the agreement with the Realm of Lothlorien to accept their support, you no longer get Yavanna's Chosen, because the Woodland Realm now have an elite halberd unit of their own, so they don't need Yavanna's Chosen. So instead they get the Sentinels of Kerin Amroth, which is a sword and shield unit. Something that has been requested for a very long time, and I can't show you because I've chosen Imladris instead of Gondor here, is that the Gondor strategy map general models now have black capes instead of blue ones, going full in with the rightly colour scheme, or the correct colour scheme for Gondor, which is of course that they are black and white, not blue and white. AI Angmar now are able to train snow trolls out of Khand Dûm after the barracks event, so that you will see snow trolls when you're fighting against Angmar more readily, which is good. Now, I mentioned last time that the world is being redone in regards what is described as a mountainous region, what's described as a forest region, what's going to be grassland, and then the fourth one, which I said at the minute, was desert. And so the first and chief thing that was done, and I've mentioned already, is that mountain has been expanded to anywhere that's also hilly, which is why I'm here in Barketta, because anyone can tell you that that is not a mountainous region, but it is a hilly region, and so that now has the mountain region as well. So anything that requires a mountain previously will work in hills as well, and like for example, off the top of my head, the Noldor barracks can only be built in mountain or grassland regions, and so hill will cover that as well. Now, the second point is that forests were expanded throughout the world and added to a few more regions, and some of those regions have now gained more trees to reflect the fact that they are now forested. Matraith, for example, and Argond, and I've been up there in Fuerost already, and then a few places over here as well. Elanin's now gained enough trees, and Vilta. And these are not trying to follow, of course, Tolkien's maps are famously sparse on forest detail, only really covering the major ones. So these are all just where we wanted forests, really. Leicester's been turned into a forest region. But it's just so that now you can look at a glance, generally, without having to go into the Green Book to work out what province is what. Whether it is forest, hill/mountain, grassland, or the fourth. And after the feedback from the previous episode, well, first of all, let me just explain that what I meant by the actual terrain resource, for example, doesn't necessarily matter what's actually visible on the map. We can set the resource to be whatever we wanted. And at the minute it was desert. And of course, desert only applies in the very, very bottom regions. And this resource only really affects sort of recruitment. It doesn't actually have an effect on the battle. Some people seem to think that it might affect battles and things like that, and that's not the case. This resource is only mentioned in the recruitment of troops. So this is very, again with the High Elves, this is very something that was moaned about a lot previously. You used to get really slow recruitment in mountain regions. Many of you will remember this, so much so that people used to avoid going for the big money makers in the mountains because you would not be able to train any troops there. The recruitment time was something like 60 turns a unit. It was ridiculous. And that is what we are linking and talking about here. So at the moment, the desert resource makes Harad, Khand, and Rune train their troops faster, and everyone else train their troops much slower in deserts. Like, the entire world has really slow recruitment in deserts, which is something you'd note if you ever attacked down here. But desert only applies, as I say, to 12 out of the 199 regions, which is an absolute waste of a resource. So what we are going to do, I know this is a developer diary, it's supposed to be only changes, but what we are going to do is change it to barren resource, or sort of depopulated might be a better word. So it's going to apply to places that are historically and lore accurately depopulated. Now, of course, that applies, if we're being really strict, to basically the entire world. But we're going to apply it more to really obvious places like the Dagorlad, like the Emyn Muil, places such as this. They are now going to have depopulated as their hidden resource. And it's called hidden because it is hidden, and the Green Book is the only way that you'll be able to know if they are depopulated. And again, there will be visual clues, given that these places have this sort of dead land. Mordor may well have depopulated in much of its land. So it's not been worked out yet, but we just know that we are going to change desert to something else and apply it a little bit more around the world. The far northern regions like Fueros might be depopulated. It's going to, that one, it doesn't necessarily apply terrain-wise, that's the problem. So it'll overwrite terrain-wise, which is why I say you'll need to read the Green Book. Because Furos at the moment is quite clearly a forest province, and but it might be depopulated. So you'll just have to have a look and see if your favourite regions are now depopulated and how that affects recruitment. We're not actually 100% sure we will change it yet, but it's certainly on the cards, and we will look into it. Right, then we come on to, a bit more specifically, to the High Elves, who have now finally had their sort of last rework and are now all set up and ready to go. So, the biggest change for the High Elves, you might note, I'm currently playing as the High Elves. This is turn 1, I haven't ended the turn. And you'll note that missing from my starting region are Dúnedain and Elrahir. And this is because the twins and, indeed, Galdor of Forlond and Harlond, they're gone. But the twins will come back. Galdor has been cut from the game altogether, so that you now only start with 3 generals. You have High Lord Elrond, your faction leader in Imladris. Over in Mithlond, you have Círdan, and then walking between the two on his way back and forth is Gildor Inglorian. And you can then summon back your generals at certain points. So the first generals to return are the twins. You will note they are in your family tree. They've been sent off map. So they exist, he is your heir, they're married, they're going to have children, they'll do everything while they're off map. But at about the 10th, somewhere between the 10th and 15th turn, so this is only really just at the very, very beginning of the game, but somewhere between the 10th and 15th turns, you can head over to Dúnedain and ask with a diplomat for the twins back, because at the moment they are off fighting with the Dúnedain. Now, it might be Dúnedain, it might be Ostsul, we might even have you go all the way over to Numinas or Deadman's Dyke. We're not sure yet, the finer points haven't been worked out, but send your diplomat over there. And then a short while later, both of the twins will return with their cavalry archer bodyguards, and they'll also come with an extra unit of Dúnedain each, which you will note you can train in Imladris. So that's how you get the twins back. Then the next general that is likely to spawn is a famous general from the depths of DaC history, and that is that once you've captured Ostinethil and then rebuilt the Gwaith y Myrdain, then a general will spawn with Eregion Smiths as his bodyguard with an extra unit of Eregion Smiths, and it is, of course, Dornan Austin. He is returning to the game. So, capturing and taking Ostinethil, build the Gwaith y Myrdain, you get another general. A unique general is the point there. And then the final general to return will come to you when you have 15 regions or more, or Angmar has only 2 regions left. Now, the reason those region requirements are specific is because what we are going to do, the point that hasn't been done yet, we've done this former point first, is if you are playing as anyone other than Angmar and Angmar go down to 2 regions, then the Witch King will spawn for the AI Angmar. And at that point, if you are the High Elves, Glorfindel will then come back to fight his age-old enemy. If you are playing as the High Elves as well, and you reach either 10 or 15 regions, not decided yet, then the Witch King will also spawn again, and again Glorfindel will then spawn to fight his age-old enemy. So Glorfindel is coming back when the Witch King comes, and the Witch King will come with either Angmar being almost at the cusp of defeat, or you being quite powerful. And so that is how then Glorfindel will spawn. Previously, Glorfindel just arrived whenever at turn 65 dead. That was it. Whereas now he will spawn if you're doing particularly well. So if you rush out and you get your 15 provinces really quickly, you'll get Glorfindel long before the barracks event. But do note, you only start with 4 provinces, so you do need 11 more. And if this were turn 2, you'd note that much of Eriador is taken. So it will take quite a while, which is why I think we probably will stick with 10 regions. So that's the gist of the generals returning to the High Elves. Now, there is a message at the beginning of the High Elf campaign that explains that your generals are off and that they will return in time. And that gives you information as to how to actually get them back. So that is so you won't, as long as you read the messages, you'll know what's going on. Lastly, the High Elves now only train diplomats from Imladris. They can no longer train diplomats from Mithlond, which means you no longer get 4 diplomats at the start of the game, which you did previously. That's just a minor sort of bug point. Also, a point completely off screen that means absolutely nothing to basically everyone is that the AI now trains their troops from Imladris and Mithlond properly. Previously, they were unable to train any forces, but I've rectified that, and they now train the troops they're supposed to train. So as a quick recap for the High Elves as we are discussing them, Your Noldor units can only be trained from something called a Noldor barracks or guard hall, and then it upgrades to a barracks. And in order to build that building, you have to capture Ostinethil. Then it can only be built in mountain and hill regions, or mountain/hill and grassland regions, so they can't build it in forests or deserts, or the new region barrens. The other barracks, the Lindar, the Teleri barracks, sorry, which trains Lindar and then Sindar afterwards, that can be built straight away, but it can only be built in a region with a major water source. Now, again, this is all described at the beginning of the game in a message, and the major water sources are named rivers, lakes, and all coastlands. So if it's a coast, you can definitely get it. If it surrounds a lake, you'll definitely get it. And if you're wondering whether or not the river in your region will get it, just have a quick look at a map. Does that river have a name? If it does, you can train them there. If it doesn't, then it's one of the fake rivers we've added and not enough to merit the Teleri barracks. Now, I appreciate that's a bit vague and requires you to look at a map, but do note that the Teleri barracks is available in something like 140 regions of 199 possible, so you can get it basically everywhere. So if you're one for not looking at the map, then just know if you can't build it, it is not a bug, that is a region you can't build it in. So it just restricts the high elf recruitment a little bit. The Noldor Guard Hall is pre-built in Imladris for your pleasure, but the way that the script works, you can't train any troops on turn 1, you have to wait till turn 2. Because, of course, if you lose Imladris, then you cannot build the Noldor Guild Hall at all. And if you lose Mithlond, then you can't build the Teleri barracks at all. So this is partially for... To show that if Imladris falls, the Noldor have said, nah, we're out, friends, you're on your own, and they're buggering off to Aman. But it's also, and primarily, to stop players just saying, well, I'm not going to bother with this split realm thing, I'm just going to jack in Imladris and head off to Mithlond, because if you do that, you lose all of your elite troops. So that's kind of the point of it. Ostinethil plays a much bigger part in their gameplay now as well, which is perfect, because that, arguably, Eregion was an actual sort of realm of the Elves. Imladris has always just been one little outpost, a small home, barely even a town. Elrond's family and a few of his retinue live there, whereas Eregion was the Elven region, of course, until Sauron destroyed it. So it should be more important than... Imladris in this kind of what-if campaign, restoring an actual realm rather than just making a little outpost more of a town. So there we are. That, I believe, is everything to the campaign map. A minor change. Dorthalu is now a Northmen village instead of a Gondor one, but that is a very, very minor point, as I say. So now we'll jump over to the... no, of course, one final thing, sorry. Now, again, this is not something that has yet been done, but it will be done. But I just wanted to, because this developer diary is going to be a little shorter, so I thought spread the load, talk about it now. This is a major overhaul that's coming to the Northern Dúnedain Beacon of Hope system. So the Beacon of Hope system, of course, is that at the moment, the Northern Dúnedain can train pretty much every other good faction's units, if they have the regions that align with them. So if you own Bree, you can train Breeland units. Now, Hummingbird has always found this system a little disdainful because it naturally supports you attacking your allies. The point of the system is that it started out with Gondor. Basically, by the time the Northern Dúnedain arrive in Gondor, Gondor are likely to have lost most of their provinces. And the point of it was that if the Northern Dúnedain reclaimed those provinces, of course they would train Gondorian troops. They are of the same blood, and Aragorn is the king of both of these realms. And then, of course, it expanded a little further to, well, hang on, Aragorn is actually kind of the last hope of everyone in the world of saving Middle-earth from Sauron. He's famously the last hope. Estelle, I gave hope to the Dúnedain, I kept no hope for myself. It's a major plot point in The Lord of the Rings that Aragorn is hope. And that is exactly what the point of it. We then expanded it that, hang on, if Rohan has lost their lands to Isengard, and then the king of the reunited kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor walks through their lands, reclaims them, fights Isengard out, then of course the Rohirrim are going to stand and fight with him. And that then premise expanded around the world. So every good nation will train their troops to the Dúnedain if he owns them. This also expands to more morally grey nations like Enedwaith and indeed Dunland, who, if a strong leader came through and told them you're being idiots, they would almost certainly side with him. And that is the point of the system. But as I say, and as Hummingbird has long found egregious, you are rewarded through this system by actually attacking your own allies and taking their lands and then training their troops. And so the system is going to be totally redone, and every unit that you can train is going to be added through the mercenary system rather than the straightforward barracks. So now it would be quite conceivably possible to hold only Eriador, send out quite a powerful general to Bree and train some Bree land units. Send him down through Enedwaith and Dunland, who may still even be alive, and train some of their units. Then head into Rohan, get some cavalry, head down through northern Honorian, get some Gondorian troops, and arrive at Minas Tirith with a mixed army of many, very many forces. The mercenary system is going to be restricted, though, in that you have to be allied with the nation that you are claiming the troops from, because of course with this new mercenary system it's very likely you'll be training the troops before the faction is dead, and it was always intended that you would train them because the faction is dead, but now you'll train them when the faction's alive. So the system will quite simply check either are you allied to them or are you simply not at war with them. Now I favour the latter, because if you don't ally with Gondor, for example, I mean why would you not, but if you don't and then they die, you can never ally with them and then you can never train their troops, and I think that's a major oversight. So the point will likely be that as long as you are not at war with them, and it is therefore on you to make sure that if you are at war with a nation whose troops you want, you must make peace with them. Because if you are at war with someone and they then die, you can never be at peace with them, because the game is weird like that and wars last through death. So if you want to train Gondor's forces, for example, and you're at war with them and then someone kills them, you won't be able to train them. But that's fine, because you were at war with them. They wouldn't look too kindly on you, knowing that you helped kill their faction as a nation, as an entity. But it does mean, of course, that if you do want a nation's troops, you have to watch out who you're at war with. So it's likely that that will be the case. If you're at war with Bree, you won't be able to train their troops. So the system will work exactly as intended. And it will now mean that the only barracks you'll get throughout the world will be your Northern Dúnedain barracks, which trains your troops. And of course, since version 3, your troops are available the world over now. You just need a very high culture rating. So that is coming in the future too, and I wanted to talk about it now, as I say, because this video is likely to be a bit shorter. But now we will jump over to the battle map. There's only a very few changes to show you, but there are some, and we'll have a look at them now. Welcome then to the battle map. So the major change that's happened since the last developer diary is that Louis Lux of Total War Center fame has very kindly redone the Dúnedain Ranger model and allowed everyone to use this, which is very, very kind, because he's normally a real stickler for people editing or using his works. But so the Dúnedain have been overhauled by Louis Lux, and we have added it to DaC. So you will be able to see it now. So here are the Dúnedain Rangers in all of their new glory. Although let's start with the Wardens, because the Rangers are all bent down. So this is what the Dúnedain now look like. They've got a bit more of a ruggedy look. They've got more detail in the faces, more detail in the hair. Some of them wear hoods, some of them don't. Although the Wardens, I think the upgraded model has hoods and whatnot. But let's put it up to ×1. So you can see them all walking. So the Dúnedain Wardens have been given a new model. And as I say, that new model applies to all. And there's the Dúnedain Rangers on left and right. As you say, with the Rangers, some of them wear hoods, some of them don't. The Wardens are all hoodless. But it's just a much nicer model, really, isn't it? The Scouts have also been edited as well, which is the cavalry equivalent, and there they are. And again, same model, just a new look to the Dúnedain Rangers. You will note that they do look really quite detailed, and it is an improvement over the previous model. But if you long for the previous model and you cannot simply live without it, then it is the bodyguard and the general, or the captain, sorry, for every unit. So your flag carrier has the old model and the captain behind him is of the old model. And I think you can readily see there, if we compare them standing next to each other, the detail increase is substantial. So looking at the Wardens on their own, you may have thought, I'm sure they look very similar. But when you actually compare them to what the old Dúnedain model looked like, they are substantially improved. Really, really more detailed than they were before. So the core of the Dúnedain roster has been given new visuals, basically. And the reason I've included those other units is just to show you that the captains live on with the Dúnedain look. So those are the only real unit changes for this one. Otherwise, what we're here to look at are the banners. Darwinian and Angmar have been given new battlefield banners as well. Courtesy again of Mats, our now resident banner creator. Originally it had a snowflake in the top, but it was found that people would prefer some sort of link to Sauron. And so the eye remains with the banner carrier there. Although I note that the Rudauer banner carrier has not yet had the update. Although maybe we won't do that. I don't know, actually. I'm always one for diversity, and having another visual indicator that shows you that this is a different type of unit is always quite good. But I assume that this banner will probably survive. Will probably move over to the Men of Rudauer. Another point, and something I wanted to explain in a little bit more detail, and that's why the Anduin are here. The skin changers have now been given the Relentless trait. And last time when I mentioned the Relentless trait, there were quite a few people that said, what actually is the Relentless trait? And I thought I explained it, but apparently not. So I'll just go into it a little bit more detail here. The Relentless trait is quite simply an editing of their actual animation files to take away their stagger animation. So you'll note these units behind them at the moment. When they get hit, they do that. They defend, they block, they might take a step back. And of course that's realistic, but it does mean that a small unit like Skin Changers are constantly doing the animation for blocking because they are attacked on multiple sides. So if a unit is surrounded and attacked by 3 other units, every time one of those 3 units attacks, the unit will be staggered, and they can't attack whilst they are being staggered. Because the unit actually has to do an attack animation to attack. This isn't like some games where the units being near each other merely means they're doing damage to one another, and the animations are actually totally unrelated. The animations actually are what is happening. So if a unit is not attacking, like this fellow standing just here, it means no one is dying. But the stagger animation meant that a small unit would be easily surrounded by a larger, weaker unit, and they would therefore die really easily. And so by removing the stagger animation, meaning they only now have an attack animation. So when they get attacked, nothing happens, basically. They will then just keep attacking and keep attacking. And this has been applied to the skin changes as well. I can't really... See, like this fellow just here. He's getting attacked by this man. Although he's not right now, annoyingly. There we are. And nothing happened, you see. He didn't block, he didn't stagger, he didn't anything. Now, it takes away a little bit of the realism of battle, but it helps then make units that are supposed to be very powerful, they are now actually powerful. They will survive. Because previously...
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
Ah, thank you. Units like...
slain the enemy general.
Give me a second, narrator. The Anduin skin changers previously, despite being one of the best units in the game statistically, because their units were so small, they just got massacred. Now they are dying to the Iron Crown Halberdiers, but then they are Halberdiers, they're armor piercing, and they're a medium tier unit. You would expect that. But previously they would easily get killed by Snagger or things like that. So that's what the Relentless trait is if you see it on a unit. At the moment it only applies to 2-handed units, but we are hoping to get a 1-handed version of it. And then finally, the Dorwinian banner has finally been updated as well, and is no longer just the symbol for Dorwinian slapped on a bit of cloth, and is now actually bespoke. And you'll see that it's grapes on with some leaves on a 2-tone colour background. And it's just better to have the banner as a different thing from their actual faction icon. And I like both of them. I think they're good. The Ardenaim in the next developer diary, they're getting a new banner as well, and there might be other UI bits to show you. But that, for now, is all. So a relatively minor developer diary, but just recapping really what's happened with the Elves and some other little bits over the past few days. There's a lot more modding to be done, and I hope, to be honest, to do some of it today if I can defeat this stupid General 0-hour challenge on the Contra mod, but I'm dying too much. I have to win. But anyway, sorry, that's unrelated. But... So there will be more developer diary as work is obviously ongoing and continuing. And there'll be big changes coming, like the Beacon of Hope system. There's other little changes, of course, listed that we are hoping to do. But for now, that is all. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. And until we speak again, dear friends, Nevar Neden Permad Melunin, and farewell.